"My body belongs to whoever pays," she said. Her voice trembled in the cold night, the crowd laughing as silver coins clinked on the saloon table. But when one mountain man stepped forward, everything stopped. He paid the price, then shocked them all by wrapping his coat around her shoulders and declaring, "No man owns her but God." Snow fell on the silent street, the church bell tolled, and what looked like freedom was only the beginning. Because hidden beneath the valley's frozen ground lies a deed worth more than gold her father's legacy. The very land the railroad will kill to steal. Cabin fires will burn, gunmen will ride, and the past he carries will rise against him. Can a woman once sold his property, and a man haunted by his sins, stand together against greed, hatred, and the coldest winter the mountains have ever known? Or will the price of freedom cost them everything? Before we dive in, drop your name or city in the comments. It reminds me that behind every view is a real heartbeat. The biting wind whipped through the rail camp town, carrying stinging flakes of snow that danced in the yellow light spilling. From the saloon windows, their faces were ruddy from whiskey in the cold, eyes gleaming with cruel anticipation. Saloon keeper's meaty hand gripped Alina Martinez's arm as he yanked her forward. Her long dark hair tumbled around her shoulders, and her thin cotton dress offered little protection against the winter night. Tears froze on her cheeks as she repeated the words he'd forced her to say, "My body belongs to whoever pays." Her voice cracked, the words bitter as medicine on her tongue. Silver coins clinked against tin cups as the men called out their bids. Alina kept her eyes fixed on the wooden planks beneath her feet, trying to remember her father's prayers, trying to hold on to something pure in this moment of degradation. At the edge of the crowd, Liam Kincaid stood silent as stone, his weathered face half hidden beneath the brim of his hat, his calloused hands clenched into fists inside his coat pockets as he watched. He'd seen too much cruelty in his years as a scout, too much darkness in men's hearts. The fury built in his chest like a gathering storm. The auctioneer, a weasel-faced man with tobacco-stained teeth, noticed Liam's rigid stance. "What's the matter, mountain man? Cat got your tongue." He spat a stream of brown juice into the snow. "Or maybe you ain't got the silver to bid on such a fine piece." The crowd's laughter died as Liam stepped forward. His boots struck the frozen ground with deliberate purpose as he approached the platform. Without a word, he reached into his coat and pulled out a leather pouch. The coins inside clinked as he tossed it onto the platform. The saloon keeper snatched up the pouch, his piggy eyes widening as he counted the silver inside. A smile spread across his face like oil on water. "Well, now, looks like we got ourselves a real spender." He shoved Alina toward Liam. "She's all yours, mountain man. Try not to break her too quick." Alina stumbled forward, her heart hammering against her ribs. She'd heard whispers about Liam Kincaid, how he lived alone in the high country, how he could track a wolf through a blizzard, how his rifle never missed its mark. Now he'd bought her, and she trembled at what that might mean. But instead of grabbing her or dragging her toward the saloon, Liam shrugged off his heavy buffalo coat. With gentle hands that belied his size, he wrapped it around her, shivering shoulders. The warmth of the wool-lined leather enveloped her, carrying the scents of wood smoke and pine. "Easy now," he murmured, his voice low and steady. He helped her down from the platform, supporting her elbow as she found her footing in the snow. The crowd fell silent, confused by this unexpected turn. The saloon keeper's smile twisted into a sneer. "Rooms ready upstairs, Kincaid. Unless you prefer to take her home to that cave you call a cabin." Liam turned to face the gathered men, his eyes as hard as river ice. "She's free now," his voice carried across the sudden stillness. "Bought and paid for, and no man owns her but God." A murmur rippled through the crowd. Some men laughed nervously, others cursed under their breath. The saloon keeper's face darkened. With rage? "You can't do that. She owes me money. Her father's debts ain't settled. They are now." Liam's hand rested lightly on Alina's back, steering her away from the platform. "Any man tries to say different can talk to me about it." The threat in his quiet words was clear as a drawn knife. The crowd parted before them like water around a rock, no one willing to meet Liam's steady gaze. Alina clung to his arm, her fingers digging into the rough wool of his shirt. She didn't know if she could trust this strange, silent man, but anything was better than what awaited her on that platform. Snow crunched beneath their boots as they walked away from the saloon's gaudy lights. The wind had died down, leaving the night still and crystal clear. Behind them, the crowd's muttering faded into the darkness. Alina pulled Liam's coat tighter around herself, breathing in its wild, clean scent. For the first time since her father's death, she felt something stir in her chest, something that might have been hope. The snow-packed main street gleamed beneath the coal oil lamps as Liam guided Alina away from the saloon. Their footsteps crunched in the fresh powder, marking their slow progress through the sleeping town. Behind them, clusters of men still lingered, their whispers carrying on the crystal-clear night air. "Reckon that mountain man's gone soft in the head?" someone sneered, followed by harsh laughter. "Paid good silver just to set her free." "Ain't natural," muttered another. Alina kept her head down, her fingers clutching the edges of Liam's buffalo coat. Every few steps, she glanced up at his profile, trying to read his intentions in the stern lines of his face. She'd learned the hard way that men's kindness usually came with a price. Yet something in his steady silence felt different at the edge of town. Where the buildings gave way to open country, Liam's mule stood hitched to a wooden sled. The animal stamped its hooves and snorted clouds of steam into the cold air. Liam stopped beside the sled and turned to Alina. "Best get you settled," he said, his voice soft as falling snow. Without warning, his hands circled her waist, strong but careful as he lifted her onto the sled's wooden platform. Alina stiffened at his touch, but he stepped back immediately. Giving her space, Liam reached into the sled and pulled out several thick wool blankets. One by one, he tucked them around her, building a nest of warmth against the bitter night. His movements were efficient but gentle, like someone used to tending injured creatures. The mule shifted restlessly as Liam checked the harness straps. In the quiet that followed, he cleared his throat. "Name's Liam Kincaid." Alina huddled deeper into the blankets, studying his broad shoulders as he worked. Several heartbeats passed before she found her voice. "Alina," she whispered, the name barely carrying over the whisper of wind through bare branches. Liam nodded, adjusting the mule's bridle. He didn't push for more, but something in his patient silence made the words spill from her lips like water. From a cracked jar. "My father died last spring," she said, twisting the edge of a blanket between her fingers. "The fever took him so quick, we didn't. I couldn't." She swallowed hard. There were debts. "The saloon keeper said he'd clear them if I worked for him. Said it would only take a few months." Her voice cracked on the last word. Liam's hands stilled on the harness. "But the debt kept growing," she continued. "No matter how many dishes I washed or floors I scrubbed, it was never enough. Then tonight," he said. She couldn't finish, but she didn't need to. Liam turned to face her, his expression hidden in shadow. "You'll have a roof at my cabin," he said simply. "Stay until you figure what path you want to take. No strings attached." Alina searched his face for any sign of deception, but found only weathered honesty. Still, her voice shook as she asked, "Why would you help me?" Liam was quiet for so long she thought he wouldn't answer. Finally, he said, "Some things ain't right, is all. Man's got to stand against them, or he ain't worth calling a man." He climbed onto the sled beside her, gathering the reins in his gloved hands. With a soft click of his tongue, he urged the mule forward. The runners creaked against the snow as they left the last buildings behind. The night deepened around them, like ink spreading through water. Somewhere in the distance, a wolf's howl rose, pure and wild, answered by its pack. Alina shivered, though not entirely from cold. The town's lights dwindled behind them until they were swallowed by darkness. The steady rhythm of the mule's hooves and the gentle swaying of the sled gradually eased some of the tension from Alina's shoulders. The buffalo coat still carried Liam's warmth, and she found herself leaning into it, drawing comfort from its solid presence. Her eyes grew heavy as exhaustion crept over her, but she fought to stay alert. Still not quite ready to trust her unexpected savior. The moon emerged. From behind the clouds, painting the snow-covered landscape in shades of silver, Alina watched Liam's profile, outlined against the starlit sky. His eyes remained fixed on the trail ahead, giving her the space to observe him without awkwardness. His face bore the marks of hard years, yet there was something in the set of his jaw that spoke not of cruelty, but of determination. Perhaps, she thought, there were still good men in the world after all. The sled continued its journey through the winter night, carrying them deeper into the mountains and away from the life Alina had thought would be her prison. Each step of the mule's hooves took her further from her past and toward an uncertain future, one that, for the first time in months, held a glimmer of hope. The eastern sky blushed with the first light of dawn as the sled crested a final ridge. Below, nestled against pine-covered slopes, stood a sturdy timber cabin. Smoke curled from the stone chimney like a welcoming finger, and the windows glowed with warm lamplight. Alina blinked away exhaustion, her body stiff from the long night's journey. The mule picked its way down the snowy path, its breath frosting. In the crisp morning air, as they drew closer, she could make out more details. A well-swept porch, neatly stacked firewood, and a small barn to one side. Liam brought the sled to a stop and helped Alina down, her legs trembling beneath her. The events of the previous night felt like a terrible dream, but the lingering shame was all too real. Without a word, he guided her up the wooden steps and opened the cabin door. Warmth and the rich aroma of coffee washed over her as she stepped inside. A fire crackled in the hearth, casting dancing shadows on the log walls. The single room was plain but tidy, with a rough-hewn table, 2 chairs, and a cooking area with iron pots hanging from hooks. "Sit," Liam said quietly, pulling out a chair. "You must be hungry." Alina sank into the seat, still wrapped in his buffalo coat. She watched as he moved around the cabin with practiced efficiency, spooning beans from a pot hanging over the fire, slicing fresh bread, and pouring coffee into tin cups. The food appeared before her, simple but steaming hot. Her hands shook as she lifted the spoon, trying to remember when she'd last eaten a proper meal. The beans were well seasoned, the bread still warm from the oven, and the coffee strong and sweet with molasses. "There's a loft," Liam said, pointing to a ladder that led to a small space above. "Clean blankets up there. You can rest whenever you want." He paused, then added firmly, "Door has a latch on the inside. You can close it at night." Alina's throat tightened at this consideration. She nodded, unable to speak around the lump in her throat. As they ate in companionable silence, Liam explained his life in measured words. He trapped fur in winter, hunted game year-round, and traded pelts in town when necessary. Sometimes he guided parties through the mountains or sold timber to the railroad camps. "Don't need much," he said, breaking off a piece of bread. "Quieter up here, safer too." His meaning was clear. She would be safe here, away from grabbing hands and leering faces. Alina studied him over her coffee cup, noting how his massive frame seemed almost gentle in the morning light. "I don't expect nothing from you," he continued, meeting her eyes directly. "Just eat, rest, get your strength back. When you're ready to decide what's next, that's your choice." After breakfast, Alina explored the cabin while Liam tended to the mule. Dried herbs hung from the rafters, and a shelf held basic medical supplies. A worn Bible sat on a small table near the fire. What caught her eye were the frames on the walls, hand-carved wooden frames holding carefully written Bible verses. "The Lord is my shepherd," one read in careful lettering. "I shall not want." Another proclaimed, "Be strong and of good courage." The careful craftsmanship spoke of long winter evenings spent in peaceful work as evening settled over the mountain. Liam sat in a chair by the fire, the rhythmic sound of stone against steel filling the air as he sharpened a hunting knife. Alina had spent the day dozing in the loft, coming down only when hunger pressed her. Now, as she washed their supper dishes, an old tune rose unbidden to her lips. She hummed softly the Cherokee lullaby her grandmother had sung when Alina was small. The familiar melody brought comfort, a thread connecting her to happier days. The scraping of stone against steel stopped. Alina glanced over to find Liam watching her, his expression softened with recognition. Their eyes met across the firelit room, and something passed between them, a shared understanding. Perhaps, or the first tender shoot of trust, taking root. Alina didn't stop humming, and Liam resumed his work, the knife's blade catching the firelight as it grew sharp and true. Outside, snow began to fall, adding another blanket of peace to the quiet mountain night. For the first time since her father's death, Alina felt the iron bands around her heart begin to loosen. Here in this simple cabin, with this quiet man who asked nothing but offered everything. She glimpsed a future where she might reclaim not just her freedom, but her dignity as well. The mountain days settled into a gentle rhythm. Alina found her hands yearning for purpose, for the familiar comfort of work that had marked happier times. On the fourth morning, she rose early, pulling Liam's coat tight around her shoulders as she ventured to the creek. The water rushed black and silver beneath a thin sheet of ice. Alina broke through with a bucket, the cold biting at her fingers. The weight of the filled bucket steadied her as she trudged back through the snow. Something about the simple task felt right like taking back a piece of herself. Inside the cabin, Liam looked up from stoking the fire, surprise flickering across his weathered features. "Didn't have to do that," he said quietly. "I know," Alina replied, pouring water into the cooking pot. "I wanted to." As the days passed, she found more ways to help. Her nimble fingers mended tears in Liam's worn shirts while he was out checking trap lines. She gathered kindling, stacked wood, and swept the packed earth floor. Each task freely chosen felt like a small victory. Liam never demanded her help, but she caught the appreciation in his eyes when he returned to find fresh coffee brewing or his socks darned. He would nod, sometimes touch the brim of his hat, a gesture that spoke volumes in his quiet way. One evening, as snow fell thick outside the cabin windows, Alina stirred a pot of rabbit stew while Liam cleaned his rifle at the table. The familiar motions of cooking brought comfort, but darker thoughts crept in, memories of sneering faces and cruel whispers in town. "They'll never let me forget," she said suddenly, her voice barely above a whisper. "What I was, what they made me become." Her hands trembled on the wooden spoon. The moment hung between them, fragile as frost, until 3 sharp knocks rattled the cabin door. Alina startled, nearly dropping the spoon. Liam rose slowly, one hand falling to the rifle. "Come in," he called, his voice hard. The door swung open on a blast of cold air. A man stepped inside, brushing snow from an expensive Eastern coat. His railroad company insignia gleamed on his lapel. 2 rough-looking men flanked him, hands resting meaningfully on their gun belts. "Evening," the man said, to reveal carefully combed hair. "Mr. Caldwell, agent for the Denver and Rio Grande Railroad Company." His smile didn't reach his eyes. "I've come about a matter of taxes and territory." Liam remained standing, his expression unreadable. "This is private property." "That's precisely the issue at hand." Caldwell pulled out a folded document. "According to our surveys, this parcel shows no proper deed registration. Back taxes are owed, without immediate payment or proof of ownership. I'm afraid this land will be seized for railroad development." "This is my homestead," Liam said, his voice low and dangerous. "Built it with my own hands. Been here 7 years. Squatters' rights don't hold against progress, Mr. Kincaid." Caldwell's smile widened. "The railroad is coming through this valley. Best accept that now." "No." Alina stepped forward, her heart pounding. "This valley, it was my father's land. He held the original Spanish land grant." Caldwell turned, seeming to notice her for the first time. His eyes narrowed as he took in her features, the mix of Cherokee and Mexican heritage clear in her face. "Ah," he said softly, cruel amusement in his tone. "And you would be Alina Martinez." "My father was Don Carlos Martinez." "I see." Caldwell folded his document with deliberate care. "Well, Miss Martinez, I'm afraid the railroad won't be honoring any half-breed's claim, even if such a grant existed, which I doubt." Alina felt the old shame rising, but Liam's words echoed. In her mind, what matters is truth before God. She lifted her chin, meeting Caldwell's mocking gaze. The railroad agent turned back to Liam. "You have 1 week to produce a valid deed or payment. After that, we'll be clearing this land." He settled his hat back on his head. "Good evening." The door closed behind them with finality. Alina's legs trembled, and she sank into a chair. Liam stood rigid, staring at the door, his hands clenched at his sides. "I'm sorry," Alina whispered. "I shouldn't have spoken." "No," Liam cut her off, turning to face her. "You did right. If there's a grant, there's hope." He paused, studying her face. "Your father, he kept papers." "Yes," Alina said softly. "But they're hidden, back home, in the valley where I grew up." The stew bubbled on the fire, forgotten. As silence filled the cabin, outside the snow continued to fall, covering their tracks, while inside, the weight of Caldwell's threat hung heavy in the air. Dawn crept over the mountain peaks, painting the snow-laden pines in shades of rose and gold. Inside the cabin, Alina sat at the rough-hewn table, her hands wrapped around a steaming cup of coffee. With troubled eyes, "Tell me about these papers," he said finally, turning to face her. "Your father's claim to the land." Elena's fingers tightened on the cup. "Papa received them more than 20 years ago. The Spanish authorities recognized his Cherokee mother's people had lived in the valley for generations. Ownership of the entire watershed." She paused, memories washing over her. "He was so proud, showing me the official seals, teaching me to read the fancy writing." "What happened to them?" "When the drought came and the crops failed," Elena's voice wavered. "Papa borrowed money. After he died, the lenders came. I hid the papers before they took everything else." Liam pulled out a chair, settling his large frame across from her where I'm not certain, but Alina closed her eyes, remembering Papa often rode to the old adobe church upriver. He'd spend hours there, praying, and he'd say, "Alina mi hija, remember the church. What's precious stays close to God." She opened her eyes, meeting Liam's steady gaze. "I think he hid something there." Liam nodded slowly. "How far?" 2 days' ride, maybe 3 in this snow." "Then we'd best get moving." Liam stood, already planning. "Already the animals. Pack what food we can carry." Within the hour, Liam had saddled his sturdy mule and a pack horse loaded with supplies. He helped Alina mount, making sure she was warmly wrapped in furs against the biting cold. The morning sun cast long shadows as they set out, leaving the cabin behind. The journey was slow and difficult. Them to pick their way carefully along ridge lines and through stands of towering pines. Liam led the way, watching for signs of trouble, both from nature and men who might follow their tracks. By midday, a frozen stream, crystalline, ice-coated the bare branches overhead, catching the winter light like diamond shards. Alina dismounted stiffly, stretching her cold-numbed legs. Liam built a small fire. His gaze grew distant, troubled. "Saw things, did things that haunt me still." He stared into the flames. "Too much blood spilled on this land." Alina listened quietly, offering neither judgment nor false comfort. She understood how violence could mark a soul. She'd seen enough of it herself. His arm gently dot the gesture, seemed to ease something in him. When they resumed riding, Liam's shoulders carried less tension. As evening approached, they made camp in a small clearing, and sharp in the mountain air. Alina watched the flames, feeling a familiar ache in her heart. This was how evenings had been with her. Father, quiet moments under vast skies, sharing warmth and stories. Before settling into her bedroll, Alina knelt in the snow. For the first time since her father's death, words of prayer came naturally to her lips. Her voice was soft but steady as she spoke in Spanish, then Cherokee. Thanking the Creator for guidance and protection, Liam sat very still, his own head bowed. When Alina finished, she saw something had shifted in his expression, as if her simple act of faith had lightened some of the burden he carried. They lay down on opposite sides of the fire, wrapped in warm furs. The night was alive with small sounds, the crack of frost-split branches, the distant cry of an owl, the whisper of wind through pine needles. "Thank you," Alina said quietly into the darkness, "for helping me find my father's papers. Get some rest," Liam replied gruffly, but his tone was gentle. "Long ride tomorrow." Alina closed her eyes, feeling surprisingly peaceful despite the cold and uncertainty. Whatever tomorrow brought, she was no longer alone in her struggle. Above them, the stars wheeled in their ancient paths, watching over the mountain night. The winter sun hung high overhead when they finally reached the adobe ruins. Alina's breath caught at the sight of the old church, its weathered walls standing lonely against the mountainside. The roof had long since given way, heavy snow drifting through broken wooden beams that reached toward heaven like pleading fingers. Liam helped Alina dismount, his strong hands steadying her. "Wall, protected from the bitter wind." "Papa would come here often," she said softly, her voice thick with emotion. "Sometimes for hours. I never knew why until now." Inside, snow had built up in drifts against the walls, but the stone altar still stood firm at the front of the church. Sunlight filtered through the broken roof, casting weak shadows across the rubble-strewn floor. Alina moved forward slowly, drawn by some deep instinct. She could almost see her father kneeling here in the dim light, his head bowed in prayer while he worked in secret. He always knelt right here, Alina said, touching the altar's weathered surface. Help me look. Away debris. Liam's powerful arms lifted fallen beams, while Alina brushed aside years of accumulated dirt and snow. Their breath clouded in the cold air as they worked, searching for any sign of hidden spaces. Alina's fingers suddenly caught on. Something? Here, she called. These stones, they're loose. Liam knelt beside her, helping to pry up several stones from the base of the altar. Beneath them lay a bundle wrapped carefully in oilcloth, preserved from moisture and time. Elena's hands trembled. As she lifted it out with reverent care, she unwrapped the layers. Inside lay sheets of yellowed paper, covered in elaborate Spanish script. Official seals and faded signatures marked the bottom of each page. Alina traced the words with shaking fingers, tears welling in her eyes. Papa kept it safe, all this time. Without a word, he helped her wrap the precious documents securely again. Before leaving, Alina knelt at the altar where her father had prayed so many times before. After a moment's hesitation, Liam joined her, his large frame settling beside her smaller one, their whispered prayers mixing with the winter wind that whistled through the broken walls as they emerged from the church. Dark clouds were gathering overhead. We need to move fast. They mounted quickly and started back down the trail, but the storm moved faster than their tired animals could manage. Within an hour, snow was falling so heavily they could barely see 10 feet ahead. The wind howled around them, erasing any trace of the trail beneath fresh drifts of white. Their mountainside, cave ahead. They guided their mounts toward the shelter. The cave was shallow, but deep enough to protect them from the worst of the storm. Liam quickly unpacked their gear, while Alina gathered what dry kindling she could find near the entrance. Soon they had a small fire going, its warm light dancing on the cave walls. What remained of their food, the blizzard raged outside. But here they were safe, if cold dot by lamplight. Alina pulled out the land grant, studying her father's name on the pages. I had given up hope, she admitted quietly. After Papa died, after everything that happened, I stopped believing anything good could come again. When you could have. When he finally spoke, his voice was rough with emotion. Everyone deserves a second chance, he whispered. The good book says so. Reckon I learned that the hard way myself. Alina drew the blanket tighter around them both, feeling the steady strength of him beside her. Outside, snow continued to fall heavily through the darkness, but here and there, small circle of warmth. Something new was growing, something that felt like hope. The storm broke with the dawn, leaving behind a transformed landscape. Morning sunlight caught the snow-laden branches, turning each pine needle into a crystal that sparkled against the pale blue sky. Alina and Liam emerged from their cave shelter, squinting at the brilliant white world before them. Beautiful, Alina breathed, her words forming little clouds in the crisp air. Liam nodded, already checking the animals. The fresh snow had drifted deep, making their return journey slower than before. The mule proved especially difficult, stopping every few yards to shake its head at the snow, touching its belly. Come on now, Liam urged, tugging at the lead rope. Couldn't help but smile at the battle of wills between man and mule. She watched as Liam tried coaxing, then commanding, then finally bribing the creature with an apple from their supplies. The mule accepted the treat, but still refused to move. They pressed on through the day, the sun arcing overhead as they picked their way carefully down the mountain trails. Sight of home and the thought startled her. Realizing she had begun thinking of the cabin as home, while Liam tended to the animals, Alina went inside to start supper. Her fingers were stiff with cold as she chopped vegetables and meat for a hearty stew. Through the window, he locked it with a key that hung from a leather cord around his neck. That evening, they sat close to the fire, bowls of steaming stew warming their hands. Alina found herself chuckling again about their stubborn mule. Never seen such a contrary beast, Liam said, shaking his head, but smiling. Reckon he thinks he knows better than both of us put together. He probably does, Alina replied, and their quiet laughter filled the cabin with warmth that had nothing to do with the fire. Sunday morning dawned clear and cold. Alina's stomach knotted with anxiety as they prepared for the ride into town. She hadn't been to church since before her father's death. As Liam helped Alina down from her horse, she could already hear the whisper starting. His presence steadied her, though her heart still pounded. They had almost reached the door when a sharp voice cut through the morning air. "Fallen woman," a ranch wife muttered, loud enough to be heard. "No place for her kind here." Elena froze, shame burning hot in her cheeks. "Has anyone—" His hand rested supportively at Elena's elbow. "The good book says, 'Judge not,' if I recall correct." The preacher, who had been watching from the doorway, stepped forward. He was a thin man with kind eyes who studied them both before breaking into a warm smile. "Welcome," he said, extending his hand first to Elena, then to Liam. "We're glad to have you both join us today." Inside, they sat near the back, but Elena held her head high. When the first hymn began, she hesitated only a moment before joining in. Her clear, sweet voice lifted with the others, and she saw several heads turn in surprise. As the service continued, Elena felt some of the tension ease from her shoulders. By the time the final prayer was said, several people even offered small nods of acknowledgement as they filed past. The ride home was peaceful, stars beginning to appear in the darkening sky. Elena felt lighter somehow, as if a heavy burden had begun to shift. She glanced at Liam, who rode beside her in comfortable silence, and felt a surge of gratitude for this quiet man, who had done so much to help her reclaim her dignity. The cabin's windows glowed with welcome as they approached, lamplight spilling out across the new-fallen snow. As Liam helped her down from her horse, their eyes met for a long moment, and Elena saw in his face the same warmth she felt growing in her own heart. The days grew longer as winter settled into a peaceful rhythm at the mountain cabin. Elena found herself waking each morning with a lightness in her heart that had been absent for so long, just right. The familiar motions reminded her of watching her father's cook years ago. And now the memory brought comfort instead of pain. The yeasty smell filled the cabin as loaves rose near the warmth of the hearth. Liam had helped her set up a chicken coop from spare lumber, and now 6 hens scratched contentedly in the yard, a real home in the evenings. She worked on piecing together quilts from fabric scraps Liam had traded for in town. Her needle flew swift and sure through the layers as she stitched patterns her grandmother had taught her. Stars and pine trees that seemed right for a mountain home. Liam's gruff manner had softened. Though he remained a man of few words, he would pause in the doorway sometimes, watching her work with an expression that made her cheeks warm. "Rifle. Time you learned to protect yourself," he said. Setting up targets against a snow-covered log, Elena's hands trembled as she lifted the heavy weapon. Liam stood close behind her, adjusting her grip and stance with gentle patience. "Breathe steady," he murmured. "Take your time." The rifle's report echoed off the mountainside as Elena squeezed the trigger. She missed the target completely, but Liam simply nodded. "Again," he said. They practiced until her shoulders ached, but by the end, she could hit the target more. Often than not, that evening, Elena sat in her rocking chair by the fire, darning holes in wool socks. Without thinking, she began to sing softly an old Spanish lullaby her father had loved. Her clear voice filled the cabin with warmth as her needle moved in rhythm with the melody. When she glanced up, she found Liam watching her from his chair, his usually stern face softened in the lamplight. The tenderness in his expression made her heart skip, but she didn't stop singing. The song ended, and comfortable silence settled between them. "I used to dream of teaching," Elena said suddenly, surprising herself with the admission. "Before everything, I wanted to help children. Learn to read, to love books the way I do." She looked down at her hands. "Perhaps someday I could even start a small school." "Reckon you could," Liam said quietly. "You got strength enough in you for that, and more." With her father's deed secured in Liam's locked chest, he led them up a winding trail to a high ridge overlooking the entire valley. "Here," Liam said, his voice soft with reverence. "Something about this land speaks to a man's soul. The forests, streams, even the silence, it's all sacred in its way." Elena understood. The vastness before them stirred something deep within her too. Without thinking, she reached out and placed her hand over his, where it rested on his saddle horn. "It feels like home," she whispered, "like I was meant to find my way here." They stood together as the setting sun painted the snow-capped peaks in shades of rose and gold. The land spoke for them, its beauty a testimony to the providence that had brought them together on this mountain. The evening light cast long shadows across the snow as they rode home, both lost in thoughts of how much had changed since that desperate night at the saloon, where there had been fear and distrust. Now trust bloomed. Protection had grown into something deeper, something neither of them had expected to find in this remote valley. The fire crackled low in the hearth. On a quilt, while Liam stared into the flames, something in his expression seemed distant, haunted by memories she could only guess at. "Been meaning to tell you something," Liam said finally, his voice rough with emotion. "About why I live so far from folks." He shifted in his chair, fingers working at the worn leather of his belt. Made her heart ache, saw things, did things. He swallowed hard, led soldiers to camps, his shoulders hunched as if bearing a physical weight. Can't face townfolk much nowadays. Alina set aside her quilting and leaned forward. "My father used to say something about such things," she said softly. Liam's eyes met hers, desperate. "For understanding, how can that be enough?" "Because you chose differently when it mattered," Alina said. "That night at the saloon, you could have been like all the others. Instead, you showed mercy. That's who you truly are, Liam." Silence stretched between them, broken only by the whisper of burning wood. Then Liam reached across the space between their chairs, his calloused fingers brushing her hand. "You've changed things here," he admitted quietly. "Used to think silence was all I deserved, but you've made this cabin feel like—" He paused, searching for words. "Like a real home." Elena's heart swelled at his words. Later that night, as she climbed the ladder to her loft bed, a smile played at her lips, the first genuine smile she'd worn in years. She fell asleep to the comforting sounds of Liam banking the fire below. The days that followed held a new lightness. Alina found herself laughing at Liam's dry observations about his stubborn mule. He, in turn, listened intently as she shared stories of her childhood, of her father teaching her to read by lamplight. One crisp morning, they ventured into the snowy woods together to gather firewood. Liam showed her how to spot the best dried branches under fresh snow. As they worked, a family of deer picked their way through the trees nearby, unafraid. Alina stood perfectly still, watching their graceful movements, aware of Liam's presence close behind her. "Beautiful," she whispered. The deer lifted their heads at her voice, but didn't flee. "Yes," Liam replied softly, but when she glanced back, he wasn't looking at the deer. That evening, snow began falling again, adding to the deep drifts around the cabin. They sat by the fire after supper, the familiar comfort of their routine. Somehow different now, charged with unspoken feelings, Liam set aside the knife he'd been sharpening and cleared his throat. "Alina," he began, his voice uncertain. "These past months, having you here—" He stood and moved to kneel beside her chair, looking up into her face with naked honesty. "I never expected to find love again. Figured I didn't deserve it, but I can't help how I feel about you." Elena's heart thundered in her chest as she met his gaze. Her hands trembled as she reached out to touch his weathered cheek. "I was so afraid," she whispered. "Afraid to trust, to hope, to love." Her voice grew, stronger. "But you showed me I could be more than my past, and somewhere along the way, I fell in love with you too." Liam caught her hand in his, pressing it to his heart. Outside, snow continued to fall softly in the gathering dusk, but inside the cabin, warmth bloomed like springtime, full of promise and new beginnings. Dawn painted the mountains gold, but the peaceful morning shattered when dark smoke rose against the crystal sky. Liam had left Alina sleeping while he went to chop wood, his axe swinging in steady rhythm. The familiar task filled him with contentment, thoughts drifting to their shared confession of love the night before. The first hint of trouble came as acrid smoke drifted through the pines. Liam's heart seized. Dropping his axe, he sprinted through knee-deep snow toward the cabin. His legs burned with effort as he pushed through the drifts. Lungs aching in the frigid air, horror struck him as he burst into the clearing. Flames engulfed the cabin, orange tongues licking at the timber walls. Black smoke billowed from the windows where curtains Alina had sewn now burned to ash. Before he could race forward, movement flashed in his peripheral vision. The first blow caught him from behind, sending him sprawling face first into the snow. Boots surrounded him as he tried to rise. Through the ringing in his ears, he heard Elena's screams from inside the burning structure. "Elena!" He fought to stand, but rough hands grabbed him. Fists and boot tips struck him repeatedly, driving him back down. Blood splattered crimson across white snow as they beat him without mercy. Through swollen eyes, he glimpsed Alina being dragged from the cabin by two of Caldwell's men. She fought like a wild thing, kicking and clawing as they hauled her toward a waiting wagon. Liam, her voice cracked with desperation. "Help me!" He surged upward again, taking another brutal blow to his ribs. Something cracked inside him. Still, he reached for her, fingers stretching through empty air as they threw her into the wagon bed. One of the men emerged from the burning, Cabin clutching the lockbox that had held the deed. "Got it," he called, waving the papers triumphantly. "No!" Liam gasped, struggling to breathe through what felt like broken ribs. A final kick sent him sprawling backward. Elena's screams grew fainter as the wagon pulled away. Liam tried to crawl after it, but his battered body betrayed him. Darkness crept at the edges of his vision. The last thing he saw was Elena's tear-streaked face as she reached toward him, growing smaller and smaller until the wagon disappeared into the trees. He lay there as consciousness slipped away, the heat of the burning cabin barely reaching him. Through the cold, hours passed before awareness returned. The fire had burned itself out, leaving only smoking ruins where his home had stood. Night approached, temperatures plummeting as shadows lengthened. Liam forced himself to move, every breath sending daggers through his chest. His entire body screamed in protest as he pushed himself to his knees. Blood had frozen in his beard, his clothes stiff with it. But Elena's face haunted him, driving him upward despite the agony. He stumbled toward the tree line, one hand pressed against his broken ribs. Each step was torture, but he couldn't let her disappear into Caldwell's clutches. Snow had begun falling again, thick flakes obscuring his vision. As full dark descended, only starlight guided his way through the forest. His thoughts grew clouded as hypothermia set in. Had he been walking for minutes or hours? The trees all looked the same, branches heavy with snow. Several times he fell, each time taking longer to rise. But memories of Elena's quiet prayers by firelight pushed him forward. She had trusted him to protect her. He couldn't fail her now. Near a frozen creek, his legs finally gave out. He collapsed into a snowbank, shivering violently. Ice crystals formed on his eyelashes as he stared up at the cold stars. They reminded him of Elena's eyes when she smiled, bright with hope he'd helped restore. Elena. Her name came out as barely a whisper, his cracked lips bleeding. Darkness crept over him like a heavy blanket. The last thing he felt was snow continuing to fall softly on his face before consciousness slipped away entirely, leaving him alone in the frozen night. The creek burbled faintly beneath its coating of ice. Winds sighed through pine boughs, and Liam lay still in the deepening snow, while somewhere in the darkness, wagon wheels carried Elena further and further from the ruins of their shared dreams. Consciousness returned slowly, like swimming up through murky water. Liam's eyes fluttered open to find himself lying on soft furs in a timber lodge. The air held warmth and the sharp scent of healing herbs. Firelight danced on rough-hewn walls as his vision cleared. "Welcome back, old friend," a familiar voice spoke softly. Henry, the Ute Scout who had once saved his life years ago, leaned forward into the light. His weathered face held gentle concern. Liam tried to speak, but his throat felt like sandpaper. Henry lifted a clay cup of water to his lips. After several sips, Liam managed to rasp, "How long?" 3 days since the hunters found you half-buried." "In snow," Henry replied, stirring a pot of elk broth hanging over the fire. "The Creator guided their steps to you just in time." Memory crashed back like ice water. The burning cabin, Elena's screams. His broken body failing him in the snow, Liam struggled to sit up, but pain lanced through his chest. Henry's firm hand pressed him back down. "Easy, brother. Your ribs need more time." Henry spooned warm broth into a cup. "First, you must rebuild your strength." Between careful sips of the rich broth, Henry shared what he had learned. Caldwell had arranged a formal hearing in town for the following week. He meant to have the valley officially seized, using Elena's captivity to prevent her testimony about the deed. "Where are they holding her?" Liam's voice was hoarse with emotion. "The railroad hotel, heavily guarded." Henry added more herbs to the broth. "But violence will not save her, my friend. That path leads only to more blood." Liam's hands clenched. In frustration, "I have to do something. I promised to protect her." "And you will," Henry said firmly. But true strength comes from standing in truth, not force. The people must see justice done in the light. Over the next days, Henry's patient care slowly restored Liam's body. The herbal remedies eased his pain, while the rich broths rebuilt his strength. Each morning, Henry helped him walk further, first around the lodge, then outside among the towering pines. When Liam could finally hold his rifle steady again, Henry worked with him to regain his aim. But the Ute Scout continually emphasized using wisdom over weapons. "The bullet travels fast, but solves little," he would say. "Truth travels slow, but changes hearts." The nights were hardest. Lying awake, Liam tortured himself with guilt. He should have been more vigilant, should have hidden Alina better, should have fought harder. The weight of his failure pressed down like a mountain of stone. One evening, as they sat by the fire, Henry noticed Liam's dark mood. "You carry too much blame, brother. I let her down," Liam said roughly, "just like I let down so many others." In my past, Henry was quiet for a long moment, studying the flames. "Redemption isn't in how hard you fight, but how right you stand," he finally said. "The Creator gives second chances, but we must choose the better path." The wisdom in those words slowly sank into Liam's troubled spirit. Violence had marked so much of his life. Perhaps it was time for a different kind of strength. By week's end, Liam could mount a horse without pain. His body was nowhere near fully healed, but determination burned stronger than discomfort. Henry provided him with a sturdy paint horse, knowing Liam's own mount had been lost in the attack. As dawn broke crystal clear and bitter cold, they prepared to ride. Henry checked their supplies one final time. Food, ammunition, medical supplies, and most importantly, copies of old maps showing the original Spanish land grants. "We must trust it will prevail." Liam nodded, settling carefully onto his horse. By his side, the two friends urged their horses forward through the drifts. They had a long ride ahead through the winter-locked wilderness. But as the morning sun painted the mountains gold, Liam felt a quiet certainty grow in his heart. With Henry's wisdom to guide him and truth as his sword, he would find a way to save Alina and their shared dreams of home. The town courthouse hummed with tension on that cold winter morning. Wooden benches creaked under the weight of anxious townsfolk as Mr. Caldwell strutted before the judge's desk. Threat to anyone who might speak up, Alina sat near the front, her wrists bound with rough rope. Though her clothes were wrinkled from days in captivity, she held her head high. Her dark eyes blazed with quiet defiance as Caldwell presented his papers to Judge Harrison with a flourish. "As you can see, Your Honor," Caldwell announced, his voice dripping with false courtesy, "these documents clearly show the railroad's rightful claim to the valley." Elena's hands trembled in her lap, but she refused to look down. Around her, townsfolk shifted uncomfortably, none daring to meet her gaze. Judge Harrison cleared his throat. "Well then, in the absence of any competing claim, I have no choice but to declare the land forfeited to the railroad company." The heavy courthouse doors crashed open. Liam Kincaid stood in the doorway, his tall frame silhouetted against the morning light. Though his face still showed bruises and he moved stiffly, his eyes burned with purpose. Beside him stood Henry, the Ute Scout, calm and dignified in his buckskins. Gasps rippled through the courthouse. Elena's heart leaped at the sight of Liam, alive, tears springing to her eyes. "Your Honor," Liam's voice carried clear and strong across the stunned room. "Elena Martinez has the right to speak on her own behalf." Caldwell's face darkened. "This is absurd. This woman has no standing here. Let her speak." A new voice rang out. The Reverend Matthews rose from his seat, his lined face stern with conviction. "If we claim to serve justice in this court, we must hear all voices before judgment is passed." Other townsfolk began to murmur in agreement. The judge looked between Caldwell's thunderous expression and the preacher's steady gaze, then nodded. Slowly, "Very well, remove her bonds." A deputy hurried to cut Elena's ropes. She stood carefully, rubbing her wrists. Her voice started soft, but grew stronger with each word. "My father, Miguel Martinez, was granted this land legally 30 years ago. He was Cherokee and Mexican, but he was also a man of honor who believed in both law and faith." She lifted her chin, meeting the judge's eyes directly. The original Spanish land grant was witnessed, sealed, and registered. My father paid for this valley with years of honest work, and his blood runs in my veins. I am his rightful heir." "Pretty words," Caldwell sneered. "But where is this supposed grant? Convenient that it's missing, isn't it?" Henry stepped forward. Then, reaching into his leather pouch, he withdrew an oilcloth bundle, weathered but intact. "Not missing," he said simply. The courthouse fell silent as Henry carefully unwrapped the documents. Alina gasped. Softly, it was a duplicate copy of the grant, one her father must have made years ago. Unmistakable, Judge Harrison took the papers with careful hands, examining the seal and signatures. His eyebrows rose as he read. "These appear genuine. The grant is properly witnessed and recorded." Scheme was crumbling before his eyes. Behind him, his hired guns shifted uneasily, no longer so certain of their position. The judge straightened in his chair. "Given this evidence, I cannot ignore Miss Martinez's legitimate claim to the valley. The railroad's petition is denied." Joy bloomed across Elena's face. "This is outrageous. I demand you demand nothing." Judge Harrison cut him off sharply. "They strike me as suspicious now." The railroad agent's mouth snapped shut. He grabbed his hat and stormed out, his gunmen trailing behind like scolded dogs. Caldwell's face contorted with rage. "Seize those documents," he bellowed, jabbing his finger toward the judge's bench. His hired guns lurched forward, hands reaching for their weapons. "Stop right there," Reverend Matthew's voice thundered through the courthouse. The preacher stepped into the aisle, spreading his arms wide. Other townsfolk rose behind him, the blacksmith, several ranchers, even the widow Thompson who ran the general store. They formed a human wall between Caldwell's men and the judge's bench. "This is our town," the blacksmith growled, his massive arms crossed, "and we aim to see justice done proper." Liam moved with fluid grace despite his injuries, positioning himself in front of Alina, his broad shoulders tensed as he stared down the gunman, ready to defend her with his life if needed. Caldwell's men shifted, uncertainly outnumbered by determined townsfolk. Judge Harrison's face was pale, but his voice rang firm as he stood. "I hereby declare the Spanish land grant valid and binding." He fixed Caldwell with a steely glare. Sheriff Cooper and his deputies, who had been watching from the doorway, moved in swiftly. They disarmed Caldwell's thugs one by one, confiscating weapons and clapping irons on wrists. "This is an outrage." Caldwell tried to back away, but Deputy Wilson caught his arm. "You cannot do this to me. The railroad will hear about your corruption soon enough," Judge Harrison replied coldly. "Take them away." The lawmen marched Caldwell and his men out under guard. As they disappeared through the courthouse doors, a collective breath of relief swept through the room. The tension drained away like snow melting in spring sunshine. Elena's knees buckled slightly as the stress of the past days caught up with her. Liam's strong arm was there instantly, supporting her. His touch was gentle despite his warrior's strength. Liam and Alina with dignity. "Mr. Kincaid, I believe these documents belong in your safekeeping, given your claim to the land." But Liam shook his head, taking the papers reverently and holding them out to Alina. "No, Your Honor. These belong to Miss Martinez. They're her birthright, bought with her father's honor and her own courage." Alina looked up at him, tears sparkling in her dark eyes. With deliberate grace, she pressed the papers back into Liam's calloused hands, covering them with her own. "Your strength bought my freedom, Liam. Belongs to both of us now." A moment of profound silence fell over the courthouse. Then someone, perhaps the preacher's wife, began to clap. The applause spread like wildfire, filling the room with its joyful thunder. Townsfolk crowded forward, offering congratulations and apologies. Welcoming Alina properly at last, through the windows came the sound of bells pealing from the church tower. Across the snow-covered town, the sound seemed to wash away the last shadows of fear and shame. Liam carefully tucked the deed into his coat, then offered Alina his arm. Together they walked down the courthouse aisle, past smiling faces and friendly nods. Henry followed, his usual stoic expression warmed by a slight smile. They stepped out into the winter morning. The sun sparkled on fresh snow, and the air was crisp and clean. Elena's hand found Liam's, their fingers intertwining naturally. Of the burdens of the past, the church bells continued to ring their joyful song, echoing off the mountains that had sheltered them, calling them home to the valley they would now share together. The valley echoed with the sounds of hammering and sawing as neighbors gathered to help rebuild Liam's cabin. Fresh-cut pine logs lay ready, their sap still sticky in the winter sun. Women laid out steaming pies on makeshift tables, and while men wielded axes and saws with practiced skill. Children darted through the snow, their laughter bright as sleigh bells. Alina moved among the helpers, offering coffee and warm thanks. No whispers followed her, now only genuine smiles and respectful nods. She had found her place among them, earned through courage and grace. Reverend Matthews raised his hands as the last beam settled into place. "Let us pray," he called out, and heads bowed beneath the crisp mountain sky. His blessing rang clear. "Lord, make this house a sanctuary of your love, a haven of peace for those who dwell within." 2 weeks later, candlelight filled the old adobe church where they had found the deed. Pine bows and simple white ribbons adorned the walls. The congregation packed the pews, their breath visible in the chilly air as they sang Amazing Grace. Stood at the back, wrapped in a dress she had sewn herself, cream-colored wool with lace at the collar. Her dark hair was crowned with winter roses. As the music swelled, she walked forward with measured steps, her head held high. Gone was the frightened girl from the saloon stage. In her place stood a woman who knew her worth in God's eyes. Liam waited at the altar, tall and strong in his best coat. His eyes grew bright when he saw her, filled with a tenderness that made the women in the congregation dab at their eyes. Their vows rang simple and true through the church. "I promise to honor you, protect you, and walk in faith with you all my days." When the preacher pronounced them husband and wife, Liam took Elena's hand gently in his Eurosong. "Woke these mountains," he whispered, "made them live again." They stepped out into the snowy twilight together. Their neighbors surrounded them, with joy, tossing handfuls of grain for prosperity. The valley spread before them, secured by justice and love. Their home stood ready on its distant ridge, smoke curling from its chimney into the darkening sky. As the church bells rang out across the snow, Liam and Alina walked forward into their new life, faith lighting their path home. If you believe stories can heal, lift, and connect us, this channel is for you. Thanks for being here. Hit subscribe, and I'll meet you again tomorrow with something real.